driving a little red Nissan Juke on my way up through Alabama to Tennessee. I think probably the biggest question I'm going to get from listeners is, what was the impetus for My Front Porch? So it really goes back to an original idea that I had probably almost 20 years ago, maybe 17 years ago. I was thinking about a career in journalism, maybe as an editor, writing for a magazine, something along those lines. And it occurred to me that there were probably some really great opportunities out there to travel while I was writing. And I also was pursuing a minor in photography at the University of North Florida. So I had some experience with doing some freelance photography work. And I started to think, how cool would it be to, say, get a grant from the government, get in my car with my camera, and travel across the country to, retirement communities and nursing homes around the United States, and to record stories of, people who had lived in a generation and a time that we really were not connected to any longer. The advent of technology in the last handful of decades has really taken us to a place where pretty much the general consensus is that we're very disconnected from each other. And I really enjoyed listening to the stories of people of that generation, we'll call it baby boomers and older, that, would talk about history in a way that was personable and relatable to them. And it was oftentimes poignant stories, funny stories, love stories, ghost stories. So the stories were, a wealth of subjects and genres, and they were no less entertaining no matter who the storyteller was. So it occurred to me that it would be just a really cool idea to preserve those stories along the way. But, the position that I was in at the time, I was working as a property manager in multifamily housing, and so opportunities were not readily presenting themselves for me to just abandon, a very lucrative career financially and just, head out across the country. And eventually I started a family, and began life like we normally all do. And so I didn't really get to follow through on my intentions of being a writer. But that's the way life goes sometimes. So, I spent the better part of the last 20 years raising my son and being in this business and doing what I loved for a long, long time. But recently, with COVID-19 and some other things that were going on in my life in the last couple of years, time has opened up a place for me to work on those kinds of creative ventures again. And so podcasts, which are, now very much more popular than they were back, call it 20 years ago, is a topic that a couple of my friends, Juanita and Angel, brought up to me as a possibility. And, back in 2005, when we went through the recession, I briefly had a little bit of a career crisis. And at that point in time, like many Americans, was in the process of doing what I considered to be reinventing myself. And so that's always kind of stuck with me. I did a little bit of a blog. It obviously was not very well followed back then because I frankly didn't know what I was doing. And I really didn't promote it or market it. I don't believe Facebook was really that prevalent back then, and if it even existed. And so there just really wasn't a following for it. And so after call it like 10 or 12 blogs, I finally just stopped. So initially I thought when the idea of the podcast came around that I would do a podcast called Reinvent Yourself. So I did my initial research, and come to find out, one was already out there with that very same name and topic. So, that kind of made me step back a little bit and reevaluate. And then I remembered, how 17 years ago, my idea of traveling across the country and gathering stories was something that I was really excited about and had, really strongly considered. And it really made sense to me now during COVID-19 that the mentality of Americans was having to change, because we were not living our normal existence any longer. We were actually sitting down and withdrawing from technology for the first time in a long time, and we were reconnecting with each other. We were talking to each other. Families were spending quality time together. And this wasn't just happening to us here in the United States, but it was happening to us globally. I began to realize that there were probably a lot of stories being told out there, and that the lost art of storytelling might become something that people would tune into again. So that is basically the impetus for where I'm at right now. And I guess the idea that it would be My Front Porch came to me like a lot of ideas do. And that, it just occurred to me, where do people normally go when they're, sitting around and listening to stories? Oftentimes they're sitting out on their front porch with others and drinking tea or lemonade and just listening to these great, tales of times past. So that's the idea behind My Front Porch and where it started.